Universitas saat ini telah bertransformasi menembus batas dinding ruang kelas karena Universitas saat ini telah bertransformasi menembus batas dinding ruang kelas karena pendidikan tinggi sudah memasuki era baru. Universitas juga memainkan peran penting sebagai agen perubahan publik secara luas melalui sosialisasi dan penelitian berkualitas melalui kabar kampus. Oleh karena itu, ini saatnya para dosen menampilkan kompetensi serta hasil riset melalui berbagai cara diseminasi. Bersama Klinik Hukum dan Instagram Live Hukum Online, para dosen mendapatkan ruang berbagi perspektif kepada komunitas hukum terbesar di Indonesia. Untuk kebutuhan aktivitas perkuliahan, Premium Stories hadir dengan insight tentang isu-isu hukum terkini. Tak berhenti sampai di situ, Sivitas Akademika Kampus Mitra University Solutions mendapatkan akses untuk mengikuti kelas penulisan jurnal. Para mentor berpengalaman akan memberikan bimbingan tahap demi tahap, mulai dari proses penulisan hingga publikasi. Kemudian, untuk menunjang semua kebutuhan riset, Hukum Online pun menghadirkan akses bagi Sivitas Akademika untuk menjelajahi pusat data kami. Temukan ratusan ribu peraturan, mulai dari tingkat pusat, daerah, hingga surat edaran. Melalui setiap fitur dan aktivitas bersama University Solutions, Universitas mampu memaksimalkan pencapaian Tridharma perguruan tinggi dan meraih akreditasi unggul. Sudah saatnya kampus Anda bergabung bersama University Solutions dari Hukum Online. Universitas saat ini telah bertransformasi menembus batas dinding ruang kelas karena pendidikan tinggi sudah memasuki era baru. Universitas juga memainkan peran penting sebagai agen perubahan publik secara luas melalui sosialisasi dan penelitian berkualitas melalui kabar kampus. Oleh karena itu, ini saatnya para dosen menampilkan kompetensi serta hasil riset melalui berbagai cara diseminasi. Bersama Klinik Hukum dan Instagram Live Hukum Online, para dosen mendapatkan ruang berbagi perspektif kepada komunitas hukum terbesar di Indonesia. Untuk kebutuhan aktivitas perkuliahan, Premium Stories hadir dengan insight tentang isu-isu hukum terkini. Tak berhenti sampai di situ, Sivitas Akademika Kampus Mitra University Solutions mendapatkan akses untuk mengikuti kelas penulisan jurnal. Para mentor berpengalaman akan memberikan bimbingan tahap demi tahap, mulai dari proses penulisan hingga publikasi. Kemudian, untuk menunjang semua kebutuhan riset, Hukum Online pun menghadirkan akses bagi Sivitas Akademika untuk menjelajahi pusat data kami. Temukan ratusan ribu peraturan, mulai dari tingkat pusat, daerah, hingga surat edaran. Melalui setiap fitur dan aktivitas bersama University Solutions, Universitas mampu memaksimalkan pencapaian tridharma perguruan tinggi dan meraih akreditasi unggul. Sudah saatnya kampus Anda bergabung bersama University Solutions dari Hukum Online.
Habis itu 3 menit lagi baru mulai. participants, welcome back to our event. Please be seated and remain conducive for our event. We will begin shortly. Participants, welcome back as we progress to the next segment of our ICRTA, the second plenary session. The second plenary session is distinguished by a collaborative effort between two prominent entities, namely the Economic Research Institute for ASEAN and East Asia, as well as UPH. Before we begin, may I kindly remind you to remain conducive. ERIA, an international organization founded in Jakarta, Indonesia in 2008, is dedicated to economic research, policy analysis, as well as capacity building. Its mission revolves around supporting economic integration and development within the ASEAN and East Asian region. ERIA's noteworthy contributions have been acknowledged, earning prestigious recognitions such as the ASEAN Outstanding Contribution Award in 2019. To guide us through this enlightening plenary session, we are honored to have Mr. Junianto James Lossery assuming the chair. Pat James is currently pursuing his doctoral study at the City University of Hong Kong as an awardee of the Hong Kong PhD Fellowship Scheme and the Belt and Road Scholarship. While doing his doctoral study, he is taking a sabbatical from his position. Okay. Before we proceed, may I call on Ibu Feliana Tanaya for opening remarks. Ibu Feliana, may I please invite you to the stage?
Professor Fukunari Kimura, Mr. Scott Hanna, our own Michelle, and also James. Distinguished guests, students, participants, speakers, everybody. Hello, good afternoon. Okay, I know a session after lunch can be very challenging, but I'm sure we will have a very fruitful discussion at the second panel session. On behalf of Faculty of Law UPH, I am very honored to welcome all of you to this special event co-organized with the ERIA, Economic Research Institute for ASEAN and East Asia. And today's discussion will be on local content requirements, which for me, I think is a very timely and critical one, with significant implications for our region's economic development and legal landscape. As we all know, local content requirements are regulations that mandate a certain level of domestic content in goods or services. While these policies can aim to foster domestic industries, create jobs, and transfer technology, they can also raise concern about trade barrier, market access, and ultimately hinder economic growth. Here at UPH, we are committed to fostering a platform for critical discourse on legal-related issues with real-world consequences. This event brings together distinguished experts from ERIA, academia, the legal profession, industry, and students to delve into the complexities of local content requirements. Through the insightful presentations and discussions from our speakers today, we hope to gain a deeper understanding of the various forms and justification for local content requirements, the potential economic and legal ramification of these policies, strategies for striking a balance between promoting the domestic development and upholding free trade principles. And I'm very confident that today's event will provide valuable insights for policymakers, practitioners, and businesses alike. Without further ado, I would like to extend my sincere gratitude for our esteemed panelists and chair of this event for joining us today. Also want to thank all the participants, all the students who are going to enjoy this panel session today. I believe the discussion will be beneficial and fruitful for all of us. I also want to thank us ERIA for their collaboration in making this event possible. Now let's delve into this important conversation, and we might learn a lot of things that is, I think, very beneficial for our legal development and our study for students in UPH. Thank you, and God bless us all.
Thank you to Ibu Feliana for the opening remarks. Before we begin, allow me to reintroduce Pat James, our chair for this session. Pat James is currently pursuing his doctoral study at the City University of Hong Kong as an awardee of the Hong Kong PhD Fellowship Scheme and the Belt and Road Scholarship. While doing his doctoral study, he is taking a sabbatical from his position as counsel at Umbra Strategic Legal Solutions. As a qualified advocate in Indonesia and a solicitor in England and Wales, Pat James has practiced in Singapore with Magic Circle Law Firm on both commercial and investor-state arbitration matters, and in Indonesia with one of the largest law firms. Pat James also had the opportunity of working at the Center for International Law, National University of Singapore, where his research was on international trade and investment law as well as policies. Please join me in extending a warm welcome to Pat James as he takes the stage.
Selamat siang. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, my former professors at UPH, conference participants, and students. It is an honor for me to be here, and I'm very happy to be invited by UPH and ERIA to chair this UPH ERIA special event. Well, as Bufeli mentioned, a session after lunch is always challenging. But I'm not too worried for this session because I believe that we have very experienced and esteemed speakers who will be able to bring a very lively and interesting discussion on this very timely topic on local content requirements. So now, to begin with, I would like to invite all the speakers to the stage, Professor Fukunari Kimura, Mr. Scott Hanna, and also Professor Michelle Limenta. So allow me also to use this opportunity to introduce a book that was recently launched by ERIA, by the lead advisor of ERIA, Ms. Lily Yan Ing, who is a co-editor along with Professor Jean Grossman. The book is called Local Content Requirements, Promises, and Pitfalls. And in this book, actually, Michelle and I also contributed one chapter regarding local content requirements from the Indonesian perspectives. Now, before we begin with the presentation from each of the speakers, I will briefly explain about the local content requirements just to set a background and a context of how we understand and lead to further discussions and more in-depth analysis of local content requirements itself. Bufeli already explained earlier about what local content requirements. Simply put, this is basically regulations. It could be rules, it could be laws, or policies by government that requires businesses to use certain domestic products or services for the business's operation in a particular country. So some of the criticism that has been put forward against local content requirements is that it may hinder efficiency, as businesses are forced to source locally, while it may not be as competitive compared to imported products, for example. But the other side of the coin, it's been argued that local content requirements can help to boost the economic growth of one country. So that is why we see a lot of developing countries actually look into imposing local content requirements. But what is interesting nowadays, and I think this is why the topic is becoming very timely, is that local content requirements is no longer a policy tool used by developing countries, but also by developed countries. So I give you one example. In the United States, the American government has actually made local content requirement as a cornerstone of its policy to promote the development of electric vehicles. And this could be seen in the Inflation Reduction Act 2022. Now, to connect to the broader topic or the broader theme of this conference, local content requirements can also be seen in technological sectors. For example, if you watch Netflix, there could be a local content requirements for Netflix operation in one country in the form that Netflix must produce or must engage in the production of local movies. The other examples of local content requirements in the technological sector could be seen in the solar plan for generation of electricity. In certain countries, the government linked subsidies given to these solar plant companies to the use of domestically produced inputs. So, for example, the solar panel that they use must be solar panel that is produced in the particular country. The US has this policy, and in fact, the US policy has been under a lot of scrutiny at the WTO as well. Now that I've set the background of what local content requirements, we will hear from our diverse panelists. We have an economist, we have an industry leader, as well as a legal expert who will talk about local content requirements from very different perspectives. Now, I will introduce the first speaker who will be presenting to us from the economics perspective, Professor Fukunari Kimura. Professor Kimura is the Chief Economist for Economic Research Institute for ASEAN and East Asia. He received his Bachelor of Laws from the Faculty of Law, University of Tokyo, and Master of Science and PhD from the Department of Economics, University of Wisconsin-Madison. He previously taught at the Department of Economics at the State University of New York at Albany, and now he is teaching at the Faculty of Economics of Keio University. Professor Fuku is active in writing books and articles on international production networks and economic integration in East Asia. So, Professor Fuku, I will give the floor to you to present about local content requirements from the perspective of trade and economic growth. Thank you.
Thank you for the kind introduction. My talk is particularly from the viewpoint of newly developed and developing economies, what's going on a local content requirement. From the viewpoint of economics, local content requirements may work theoretically, but empirically we do not know many examples for successful cases, actually. So why it doesn't work, that's basically my talk here. Next, please. I'd like to make 3 points. Sorry, there's no pictures or the figures, fancy ones, but forgive me. 3 points I'd like to talk about. One is that aspiration toward economic development is very important. So that is good. So usually local content requirement is introduced for good intention, I think. But particularly in the globalization era, the formation of industrial agglomeration inside the country or other way to say, the development of domestic vertical linkage of production is important to upgrade the position in global value chains. So the currently local content requirement is introduced in that kind of intention. However, most of the past cases with local content requirements doesn't work really well. Actually, if once we have that kind of restriction, then downstream industry should purchase intermediate inputs domestically by such and such percentage point, typically. Then, naturally, imported inputs cannot be imported a lot, so that should be substituted by domestic production. So that means that intermediate inputs are more expensive and shortage in supply. So suddenly the production cost at the downstream industry increases. So we have that's a cost of local contents requirements. So we may lose a sort of international competitiveness upward, upstream and also downstream. Possible benefits is coming before introducing that kind of policy. The country cannot produce enough intermediate inputs at a cheap cost. But after introducing this, they can produce that. At the beginning, the cost could be higher, but eventually they may have a technological progress. Then at the end, they may have a sort of efficient production of intermediate inputs. So we need some technology advancement over there, upstream. Or we would invite foreign companies to produce that kind of intermediate inputs, but certainly they have to invest in, so that investment cost is there. The technology could be utilized in foreign countries more efficiently than in the home country. So the cost goes up usually. But we can save transportation cost. If we import something, then we need transportation cost. If we produce locally, then we can save transportation cost possibly. But of course, upstream industries are also importing inputs from outside too, so we have to really calculate what's going on. So we need that kind of a dynamic positive effects possibly, so that static one-shot cost must be overcome by those kind of dynamic benefits. So that's a theory, but it doesn't really work in many cases. So I will talk about that a little bit more. And also, the local content requirements are actually regarded as constraints in forming efficient value chains, because that's a very strong constraint to design and construct value chains. So this is another aspect at the end. So actually, the actual effects will be pretty negative in a sense in many cases. Next, please. I will go through 3 points quickly. The first point, costs of local content requirements. So it's like giving similar effects to trade protection in intermediate inputs upstream. If we put some tariffs on intermediate inputs, basically the effects are sort of similar. So the supply of intermediate inputs may become difficult. So the price of intermediate inputs will go up. Then actually, this may be even more than the case of so-called perfect competition. Say, after imposing SCRs, say, think of sort of domestic producers, the number of domestic producers will be very small. So they may use market power to push up prices. And also, in case of foreign companies coming into making inputs, they have to pay say, investment cost over there. So that would push up the price too. So the technological progress and the positive agglomeration effects, saving transport cost, must compensate for direct negative effects, but they do not work in many cases. So the shortage of supply and price hikes of intermediate inputs may weaken the international competitiveness of downstream industries. This is sort of actual effects in many cases. So it had better invite any sort of investment from abroad or domestic investment to form the industrial agglomeration. So we'd better leave those kind of decision-making for private sector, actually, rather than having sort of government intervention. And also bureaucratic operation of LCRs tend to be pretty complicated. Think of the operation of the company downstream. The firms must disclose the details of business operations, and such percentage of intermediate inputs are coming from domestic, such and such percent are coming from imports. The prices are going up and down. Then transactions are changing over time. They really have to disclose a really detailed information to bureaucrats. And also, complicated inventory management is coming. And also, physical inspection by bureaucrats is coming quite often. Then there's room for rent-seeking activities, I mean corruption. So that is a sort of reality. So in case of tariffs, of course, we have cheating at the border, but once coming in, the prices are really working for tariffs. So things are much more simple. But complicated operations like LCRs, the bureaucrats can make a sort of decision a lot at the spot. So that generates a lot of room for rent-seeking activities. So this is another aspect. Then, actually, large countries like Indonesia are tempted to go back to old protectionist regime because they know that their market size is going to be very big. But it doesn't have to do that because private people know that. So that is already in private decision making. So the more incentive for private sector to form industrial agglomeration, actually. So artificial policy may not be really needed. Next page, please. Another aspect is probably Michelle will talk a little bit more in detail later, but inconsistency with the international trade norms, particularly WTO and others. So we may violate our commitment in terms of TRIMs, trade-related investment measures. This is a direct violation on that. And also sometimes under GATT or GATS or subsidy and countervailing measures too. And also settlements are really complicated. One channel is a WTO dispute settlements. The other could be private level settlement, so-called ISDS. Those would complicate the trade policy a lot. And also that would generate infamous reputation. So that may affect negatively for investment attraction from outside. And also the position in international forums. Now Indonesia is studying the accession to the OECD or CPTPP. In that kind of negotiations, certainly the pervasive usage of local content requirements could work negatively. So, and also recently, geopolitical tensions are really weakening the rule-based trading regime. James talked about, inflation law, Inflation Act in the US and others. They are really weakening the rule-based trading regime. But influential countries like Indonesia are violating that again. Then actually that would further weakening the rule-based trading regime. So that kind of cost, long-term cost is also coming back. Next, please. Then actually we have many other policies to achieve the same goal. We like to set a sort of a good position in global value chains. So trade and investment liberalization facilitation. Still, Indonesia is not quite enough compared with the neighboring countries in ASEAN particularly. And also upgrade physical connectivity, doing infrastructure and others, and also urban, suburban infrastructure. We are improving a lot in the past 5-6 years, but we still have many things to do. and keep a good competition among foreign firms in the open setting. Don't invest in only one single foreign company. That's not good. You have to invite many foreign companies and compete with each other. That is very important. And also business matching between foreign and domestic firms. This is also, so we have many things to do. Then enhance absorptive capability of domestic firms. So now we have an international division of labor, task by task, rather than industry by industry. So that's why in global value chains, we have more opportunities to enjoy technology transfer or technology spillover. But certainly we need absorptive capacity of technology. Otherwise, you cannot really absorb that. So that is also a very important job for the government to enhance those kind of capabilities. Last page, please. This is just a thought experiment in the case of nickel. Actually, this is not exactly the local content requirements. Local content requirements are built up value chains going to upstream, basically. But it's nickel's case downstream. But the intention is quite similar. But now you know that nickel ore cannot be exported because of the policy. The intention is to try to build up domestic value chains, starting from nickel, then going to batteries, and then going to EVs, electric vehicles. So that's a sort of aspiration. So aspiration is good, but if you think of the actual effects of export ban, if you see a sort of really simple calculation, actually 40% of cost of EV production is batteries, 40%. Out of 40%, another 40% of the cost of battery production is nickel. So 40% times 40%, 16%, that's a cost of nickel in EV. Then a ban on nickel exports and produce batteries domestically versus export nickel ore and import batteries. What's the cost difference? Then actually, so international trade has some cost, transportation cost. So typically it's going from Indonesia to China, 5%. China, the batteries are coming back from China to Indonesia, 5%, then 10%. So 16%, 10% of 16% is a cost saving if the Indonesia can produce batteries as efficient as in China. So only 1.6% cost saving. So that's actually negligible. So the intention is that using nickel ore domestically, that would save a lot of cost, but that portion is very, very actually small. So the intention and the actual benefits coming from export ban is quite different here. Then actually by nickel export ban, theoretically, if nickel miners cannot export, then they have to sell domestically. So the production going down or price going down. Then Chinese smelter companies are coming in and they use that cheap nickel domestically and export to China. So what's going on is that nickel miners lose profit, then Chinese smelter companies make big money. So a sort of transfer from domestic miners to foreign smelter companies. So, and also innovation may not be really led by natural resource-led value chains. In the past, in Germany, they had a chemical industry that generates a lot of innovation in other industries too. The machinery industries would generate many technological progress and good innovation around there, but not starting from natural resources. So this is another thing that you have to say. So I think aspiration is good. You like to produce more domestically, and you like to have the good value chains domestically. That's good. But we have to utilize sort of usual market forces effectively. So too much government intervention may not really work quite well. Next, please. So this is a book that James talked about. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Fuku. I think that's a very enlightening presentation. So it really provides an understanding for us that local content requirements from economic perspective, probably it's not necessarily as pretty as it is being pictured by many developing countries. The promises of delivering growth, economic growth, is not always true, and it does not hold true as well. Well, now that we have heard from the economics perspective, from the research that's been done, but what we want to know is really from the business perspectives. I think it is always useful to see at a practical level, how does these local content requirements really affect businesses when they operate in a particular country? And we have an industry leader here, Mr. Scott Hanna. He works in the mining industry with PT Freeport Indonesia. He currently serves as the president of the American Chamber of Commerce in Indonesia, or AmCham, and co-chair of the Overseas Security Advisory Committee, OSAC, for Indonesia. Scott graduated with summa cum laude from Jamestown College. He has a master's degree from Lyndon B. Johnson School of Public Affairs at the University of Texas, Austin. He orchestrates several grassroots charity events, such as CrossFit for Hope Jakarta, Drive Books, Not Cars, and Pies in the Face for Charity. So Scott will deliver a presentation with case studies on local content requirements from business perspectives, and also the impacts of these kind of requirements for foreign investors' operation and decision making. Scott, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction. First of all, it's my first time out to the campus, and I want to say it's a gorgeous campus, gorgeous facility. Thank you very much for having me. It's a bit of an intimidating panel. Most of these people write books. I can barely read one, but I'll do my best. Mostly simple words, but to try to talk about, y'all are studying law, LCRs, local content requirements are a policy. How does that translate into the real economy and real business? So I'll try to give some examples to sort of further flesh out how a theoretical economic policy objective translates into the business world. But I think there's supposed to be some slides. We already kind of covered some of my introduction. An advantage to marrying the Asia PR Professional of the Year, my wife Francisca, she helped me prepare these slides. So it's a bit over the top, but your wife is always right. So that's a bit overly flattering, but we've already kind of covered my introduction. We'll go ahead and skip to the next slide. So admittedly, a lot of people have talked about the aspirations of local content requirements. Of course, the spirit makes sense, right? Indonesia wants to participate more in business activities to grow their domestic economy. However, I think the speakers and myself will echo that the practical implementation is often that it hinders business expansion, and particularly the kind of voice I'll speak to, foreign direct investment, that is, companies from outside Indonesia to come in, develop projects, develop factories. In many cases, if the rules are too onerous, and one of which is incredibly difficult in certain industries, is local content requirements, in many cases they don't come. So rather than growing the whole economy, it often captures a portion of existing investment and existing business and deters other companies from ever coming. So overall, it actually stagnates increased investment and increased growth. Having said that, the American Chamber of Commerce, or AmCham, our goal is to try to work collaboratively with Indonesia to understand and recognize those aspirations and help find solutions that both still speak to the aspirations of the government policy, but are practically possible to still allow businesses to come in, grow, create jobs, and create growth. Next slide, please. So one common perception, and this is a faculty of law, it's not sociology or history, but there's obviously some sort of post-colonial hesitations about the role of both foreigners and foreign direct investment in foreign companies in Indonesia. And one is to sort of dispel the economic reality, which is foreign direct investment or foreign companies' role in the economy is relatively small compared to most of the similar, or most of the other ASEAN economies. So to illustrate this, I show the foreign direct investment compared to GDP. So there's a common perception that foreign companies run the economy in Indonesia, but as a practical matter, they account for far less than 5% compared to the overall GDP. Many of the peer countries, particularly if you look at Vietnam and of course Singapore, foreign direct investment comprises a much bigger chunk of the economy. Our argument would be that more foreign direct investment, if, for example, Indonesia's foreign direct investment were to match, say, Vietnam, would unlock tremendous growth, create a lot of jobs for Indonesia. However, rules like LCR often deter companies from bringing in their investment and creating those projects. Next, please. So a lot of us have these in our pockets. So just to illustrate this, right? An iPhone, it has stuff from all over. So let's say Apple wanted to come in and make these here in Indonesia. It's a big population, big consumer base. We all like phones. Some of you may be Samsung, sorry about that. But those of us who like to buy America, we'll take a look at what goes into your iPhone. And I won't go through the details, but it just sort of illustrates how the parts are from all over the globe. You have things from Switzerland, you have things from the Netherlands, you have things from the US, you have things from China. So why do they choose those countries? One is the availability. If you're a big company making a lot of stuff, you need to make sure you have a consistent supply chain. The glass, I think, is predominantly sourced from the US. If you're making phones and you can't make the screen because you don't have enough glass, that is, you're locally required, for example, to source the glass or what have you domestically, you can't make your phone, you can't sell your product, you can't make profit, the business doesn't grow. So first is consistent, reliable availability. In many cases, LCRs overlook, is enough of the local stuff that you need to run your business available domestically? And that can be a big challenge. If it's not, it's a non-starter. Second of all is the quality or value of what you're getting. In other words, certain products like the lens, I think, is from Switzerland. It's not that Apple's got somebody's cousin over in Switzerland they're trying to give a business. It's because they're really good at making those things. So you're also trying to find the quality you want for your product. In many cases, LCRs overlook those: availability, consistent supply, quality of supply. So when companies make a decision where they're going to source, it's not that they don't like Indonesia or don't want to support the Indonesian economy. It's that they need to source the parts where they're best brought in from. Next, please. I'm going to pick up and kind of further go down the road of the previous example of nickel. So we've talked about the export ban and how that's an effort by Indonesia to push into the EV market. Climate change is bad. Drowning in Jakarta is not a good outcome. Nobody wants to do it. We need to do something. So the Indonesian aspiration to want to come into EV, be part of the climate solution, that's very good. And having an effort to try to have more nickel, which is a key input to EVs, sounds really good. However, the smelters that have been constructed in Indonesia make ferronickel. It's a really fancy word for an input that becomes steel. The steel that comes out of those smelters can't actually go into EVs. So here's another example of the challenge of local content requirements. In theory, this smelter is another effort to push Indonesia into a greater participation in this market by capturing the abundant nickel that's in the country to come into the EV market. But the type of nickel that comes out of those smelters can't actually go into EVs. I think it's like 96% of current smelted nickel is inappropriate for what you need to put into an EV, electrical vehicle. So what actually happens to all this smelted nickel? It goes to stainless steel predominantly in China. And as the previous speaker mentioned, also the smelting companies with the market capture, because the nickel can't be exported to be sold at a national price, it actually hurts a lot of the domestic nickel producers. So again, it's that sort of match of what you desire for an economic outcome versus the reality of what happened. The smelters that were built didn't actually match with what you need to make electrical cars. So the outcome of the policy doesn't actually reflect what the government's intention was. Next, please. So bearing in mind, sort of stepping back from all this, it's an understandable, I think aspiration has been a key word, for Indonesia to want to participate more in these projects, in these investments. But in many cases, the outcome, particularly for the companies, is that they just don't participate because the rules just don't work. And what is the outcome for Indonesia then? The investment doesn't come, the growth doesn't come, and the jobs are not created. I always think it's best to have a conversation, a lot of Q&A. That way I'm not telling you things you're not interested in or you already know, and questions to try to share things that you don't yet perhaps know about yet. I have one more slide, I think. So some of the data was drawn from a group called Castle Asia. They have great publications, a great resource if you're looking to do some additional study on this, as well as ERIA. AmCham is who I'm representing today, the broader trade association for American companies both operating and interested in investing in Indonesia. And lastly, my beloved bride's PR firm. It's fantastic. Check them out. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Scott. And I think it is always great to hear from the business as well. As lawyers, I'm always interested in learning about the practical impacts of certain regulations. So now we have heard from economists, we have heard from businesses. It seems like the story or the verdict so far is still the same. While LCR seems promising, but so far the implementation is not really as pretty as what it promises. In fact, we have heard about how it may hinder foreign investors from coming in. So as a lawyer, sometimes clients who come to me will ask about when they decide to invest in a certain country, they will also look into the legal framework that is applicable in the country. What sort of legal framework that they are going to operate in is very critical in their decision making. And this includes protection that can be granted by the government and what sort of policies that the government may introduce in the future. And normally the way we assess this, not only we look at the domestic laws, but we also look at the international obligations of these countries from the free trade agreements that they have, from the WTO laws, or some international investment agreements. So here, Michelle will be the spokesperson who is very knowledgeable on this issue. I'll introduce Michelle, probably who needs no introduction to most of you. She's an associate professor at UPH and director at the UPH Center for International Trade and Investment. She holds a bachelor's degree from Trisakti University, a master's in international business law from the University of Leiden, the Netherlands, and a PhD in international trade law from Victoria University of Wellington, New Zealand. Michelle publishes in renowned international journals on topics relating to international trade law and ASEAN law. Michelle, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, James, for very kind introductions. Actually, I'm here as a generous balance to my fantastic co-panelists and the chair. So, selamat siang, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, students, please don't fall asleep. I know it's very challenging time and I'm watching you all. But, well, it's a real pleasure and honor to be here today for this special event, which marked the significant collaboration between UPH and ERIA. So I've been asked to talk about this topic, Indonesia local content requirements within the framework of multilateral trade law. Well, to be honest, it's very difficult topic to cover in the very short time. But again, it is very important and relevant. Like, well, you have heard Bu Lily Yang Ing of ERIA and our decan, Bu Feli, in their opening remark, which emphasized that local content requirements stand as a key issue impacting global trade and investment landscape. So before I start, just imagine that you come into a country to work. You have the qualification, pass all the requirements, but then the law says the locals are first to hire. So, well, I just want to give you a sense of what the local content requirements are. So, second slides, please. So, well, there is no actually definite or exact definition of local content requirement or LCR, but they can be understood as a policy instruments aiming at supporting and promoting the use of local goods, services, and labors by requiring companies or even governmental agency to prioritize them as an input. So, well, I just want to give you a background. So LCR, it's basically a part of broader policy called localization. And this localization can turn into a trade barrier when they are used to protect domestic industry at the expense of foreign competitors. So many localization barriers have been around for a number of years. Here, this includes, you're probably familiar, made in this specific country program or by local initiative. And this has been introduced by many national governments. So you can see that made in China by 2025, also by American, and even made in India. So this has been around for a number of years. But since the global financial crisis in 2008, this policy, it's like been applied in the increasing frequency. And the fastest growing of this measure, local content requirements. So I will be very quick about this. Professor Fuku and Scott has been said the pro and cons. The pro said, yeah, it's promoting development, creating jobs, protecting domestic infant industry. But the other hand, it's actually like, well, Professor Fuku already said, there's a cost for that. So it's limiting the source of input, and then consequently, it's increasing production costs and eventually transferring higher price to consumers like you and me. And this is produce economic inefficiency. So, despite this concern, LCR remains very popular policy adopted by many countries around the globe, including Indonesia. So here next slides, please. About Indonesia, well, it has been long performed, the policy related to LCRs. In fact, the first case of Indonesia in the WTO, the World Trade Organization Dispute Settlement, was concerned Indonesia LCR in the automobile industry. It was in 1996. So perhaps the Generation X, Gen X, and millennials like me, we still remember about this national car called Mobil Timor. Who still remember that? I still remember that, yeah, friend, I know you. But yeah, so this is the program, the MOPNAS they call it, but it was unsuccessful, terminated. That's why the Gen Z, like you, my students, you probably never see this brand anymore on the road today. So, but then I think you may have heard or you might already read about this TKDN. It's been in media a lot, and this is one of the main industrial policy of Indonesia today. So this is, has been applied by Indonesia in various strategic sectors, including telecommunication, energy, even pharmaceuticals. So in the energy sector, for example, Indonesia has required the contractors engaged in the energy supply projects to source their component locally. And one way to do this is through government procurement. I know probably some of you not aware or not familiar. So for my student, what is government procurement? It refers to the purchase by government of goods and services that they need. So here, next slides please. So under international trade law, local content requirements, they are generally prohibited. So in particular, because the local content requirement questions involve discriminatory treatment of imported products in favor of domestic products. So why? Because, next slide please. This criterion, it might look simple, but it is not. But they have been clarified in a number of WTO cases. So I give you an example here because I don't have time to go through all the 3 requirements, but I go with the first point. So the first point is about connection between the measure and the procurement. So I refer to the case Canada Renewable Energy Dispute. Here, the appellate body of the WTO said that the domestic content requirement in questions is renewable energy generation equipment, which is completely disconnected from the product purchased by the government, which is electricity, and neither of which are in the competitive relationship. So, if we learn from this case, if a complainant against Indonesia local content requirement in the energy sector, for example, can demonstrate that the product that's subject to LCRs is energy generation equipment, such as power plant, machinery, pumping unit, while the product procured is electricity or oil and gas. And between the product purchased and the product of foreign origin discriminated against, they are not compete. So Indonesia cannot qualify from this exemption. So there must be a connection there. So I will not get much into detail, next slide please, but if you're interested in the assessment of Indonesia LCR with its trade and investment commitment, then I encourage you to read our article. I'm quite shy. So I co-authored this article with Bu Lilian Ing of ERIA, also James Losari, our chair today, and Oscar Fernando, which is also UPH alumni, who's now working at the ASEAN Secretariat. So our article published in this book, Local Content Requirement, Promises and Pitfall, which is also the theme of today's special event. And what is the great news is this book is an open access material, meaning you can just download it for free. So thanks to ERIA to make this available for everyone. So you can just search it and then you can get this book and also other articles. So to conclude, please. So the use of LCR is disciplined by multilateral trade law. Any advantage, condition of the use of domestic goods, which negatively affects competitive opportunities of imported goods, could be inconsistent with WTO non-discrimination principle. Well, government procurement are exempted from this obligation provided they meet certain criteria. But, so considering the legal and economic implications, Scott and Professor Fuku has highlighted this. Well, I believe governments should be careful in designing and implementing this policy. But at the same time, it also have to explore any alternative. Professor Fuku already offered us several alternatives in his earlier presentation. But finally, let's think about this. There is always a reason why WTO provide discipline on the use of LCR. Because they have trade distorting effects. It provides discrimination. It gives competitive advantage just on the basis of origin. So as you, my student, if you join in competition, you participate in competition, you probably will agree with me that we always want to compete in the fair and transparent environment. And that's why we need fair rules. I thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michelle, for the very lively presentation. Um, well, we've heard from Michelle that LCRs, there's a lot of potential in compliance of local content requirements with the WTO law. And I would echo the same as well applies for investment agreements. There's possibility of breach of certain rules under investment law as well. So now that we have heard from all the speakers, seemingly that everyone agrees LCRs is not necessarily the best tool to promote economic growth. But I think probably one question that I would ask everyone, and this is a very basic question, if we know that it's not good, and I'm sure governments, all they have access to these materials, they know about this research that has been done, then why governments still impose that? Is there any other, what are the real objectives of LCRs to these governments?
I think basically they have good intention, but as producing domestically, that generates value added, generates employment. So if you just look at the sort of direct effects, likely direct effects, they have a sort of intention to do that. But actually, it may not work if you think of the cost side and also potential benefit side. Rather, what we observed is at the end, probably negative effects are larger than positive effects. I don't say that the government officials have some bad intention to do that, not necessarily. But so in this particular case, really things are going sort of negatively at the end.
From other speakers, have anything to add?
I think it's great politics, you know? I mean, identify a politician who doesn't want to go and brag about a local business growing their jobs, you know. I sort of think about it like when we learn to ride a bike, right? We learn to ride a bike, we start with often training wheels. And that's helpful to start the process, but then the question is, when are you going to be ready to take the training wheels off? And I think the challenge with LCRs is they get that short-term training wheel for local companies who are able to expand, add jobs, and that's great, but it doesn't really prepare them to compete against international products. But those businesses obviously have political influence. And so, for example, coming back to the nickel example, tens of thousands of jobs have been created, particularly in Sulawesi. That's a good thing, right? More Indonesians are working, and people are happy about that, so it's great politics. And politics is often focused on the next election, short-term gains, and so I think that the analysis, even though they certainly have access to the information, is politicians need to get elected. We just went through this process, right? And it's a great bumper sticker to talk about tens of thousands of jobs created. I'll further illustrate in the case of my own sector, we're in the final stages of completing construction of a copper smelter. The investment for this copper smelter has some great bumper sticker messages. $3.5 billion US invested in Indonesia. Construction right now, we have around 20,000 jobs in East Java. Those things sound great. Here's the wrinkle. In the early 2000s, China built hundreds of copper smelters. So there's a global oversupply of copper smelters. So actually, this project will probably operate at a loss of tens or hundreds of millions of dollars for the next 20 years. So it's easy for someone running for governor in East Java to be excited about this project because there's lots of jobs, there's lots of investment, but for the longer term health of the Indonesian economy, it will actually cost billions to the broader macroeconomic health. But the political leaders are not necessarily perhaps as interested in what's the outcome 20 years from now as opposed to what's the outcome today.
Enlightening insights as well. Michelle, do you have anything to add?
Well, like Scott said, it's it's about support, and I never say that support is actually not good. Sometimes you need, and of course, like as a taxpayer, as a taxpayer, you also want your government to support you, right? But the problem is kind of like you have to strike the balance. Sometimes, if you support way too much, there's always like consequences toward others. So the thing is, sometimes you support one group, but the cost is actually impacting more. For example, maybe consumers. Or at the same time, there is always implication for that. So where is the point? Where is the balance? Whether that support becoming too restrictive, is becoming not necessary anymore. So I think to find the balance is always, it's easy to say, but it's very hard to implement.
Okay, my next question, we will open the floor, the question and answers for the floor as well, but let me just exercise my discretion as a chair for another round of question to the panelists. My next question, perhaps more from the economic perspective for Professor Fuku, is there actually a way to make LCR policy being consistent with an efficient market?
Yeah, there's a possible case theoretically by starting a domestic production in upstream industries. They could have a sort of learning by doing effects, and then the technology is getting better. Then at the beginning, the production cost may be high, but after 2-3 years, production costs may come down, and then eventually that may be a sort of internationally competitive. And also saving, using so-called positive agglomeration effects, sort of short distance transactions that link the value chains rather than importing a lot, then that may make a sort of production more efficient. Those are possibilities. This is actually the same, pretty similar logic to the really old story of so-called infant industry protection argument or import substituting type development strategies. So theoretically that could be there, but typically we do not really see that kind of things. Rather, more general trade and investment liberalization or facilitation may achieve the same goal without much distortion of the economy. So that's the usual story that economists would talk.
So there are actually other ways to skin the cat in a way. So you don't necessarily have to go through the difficult way of implementing local content requirements.
Yeah, there's a sort of temptation for policymakers to design or fine-tune the structure of value chains. But usually they don't know the business, actually. The business people know what could be a sort of right incentive to do. And if we do not have any much distortion in the market, then naturally they would choose the most efficient one. That's what economists believe.
Interesting. Okay, my next question goes to Michelle. So part of your presentation was very interesting where you mentioned that the WTO law creates an exemption for LCR measures by the governments, particularly for government procurement. What is really the rationale behind this exemption? Why for government procurement specifically?
Well, James, it's just written, it's written the rules. So, so actually it's not called exception, it's called exemption. So it's exempted. So it means that it just not apply to the government procurement. So perhaps the idea is first to more on provided government, with they have the autonomy, and that's for public purposes. So I think here it's just to give to give more what's call it. So it's for public purpose. It's more for the government to perform its public or their governmental function. So I think, well, you talk WTO, you talk about the rules, and the rules is like as a result of negotiation. And if you're to apply to strict, the government will never agree on the rules. So there have to be certain way, or where the government feel okay. I'm not being constrained. My hand not tied. I need to perform my duty. I need to perform my public purpose. So I think there is always like again, I think many people criticizing the WTO rules. For me, it's not perfect, but at the same time. It's the rules that provide still the government with certain flexibilities to perform or to achieve their public objective. I think that's certain way because you need the rules. And then if you are way too strict, no one gonna agree on that. So I mean, that's just maybe one aspect. Anyone want to help me?
Actually makes a lot of sense. It's a compromise to get more countries to sign up as WTO members in a way. My last question for this round is to Scott. I think to an extent you already explained about this, how local content requirements may lead to the decision of foreign investors not coming in to a country. But how big is that as an impact, especially if we're looking at some certain industries like extractive industries? If you are looking at countries where that's really where the minerals or the resources are, will that actually really affect you? Especially taking the example of Indonesia with the export ban that has been implemented by the government in the recent years.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, I think the impact is huge. But of course, like when a tree falls in the forest and no one's there, it's hard to calculate. We commissioned a study around 12 years ago, which indicated sort of unlocked U.S. investment to the tune of $70 billion. And we revisited that study, and a good chunk of it, I think if I'm not mistaken, around half, never showed up. I can think of 4 or 5 resource mega projects in the last 10 years that didn't materialize due to various local rules, each to the tune of $10 to $20 billion. You have Chevron had a proposed deep sea gas project off Sulawesi. You had the Masela gas project in eastern Indonesia. You had the Newmont expansion of the project in NTT, if I'm not mistaken. Each of these types of projects are to the tune of $10 to $20 billion. So we'll say there's, if I'm not mistaken, there were 4 or 5 big ones, the other 2 escaped my mind. We'll ballpark at $50 billion of investment against a $1 trillion GDP. I mean, this is real money. I mean, this is get out of bed money. And so these projects didn't happen. Each of those could have contributed significantly to the economy. And those are just the 4 or 5 big ones that rattle off the top of my head. You look at Tesla, the president himself, coordinating minister for economy, flew to Texas to try to court Elon Musk. And what was Tesla's ultimate decision? To go to Malaysia, which has a smaller consumer market. It has far less mineral potential, yet the rules were quite straightforward and quite simple. And so Tesla made the business decision to go to Malaysia, at least in their first entry into Southeast Asia, not to Indonesia. I think there's generally no question that the resource potential for Indonesia is both vast and underexplored, but as long as you have these significant constraints in the ground. Now, some people argue that's the best outcome. The resources will be there later. Well, as a country trying to progress from an emerging economy to a high-income economy, there's real net present value for those projects not happening. Particularly outside of Java, a lot of people are still dealing with, that borderline between poverty and moving up the economic success ladder. And so while environmentalists and conservationists might be delighted that those environments are not being tapped by resource companies, the reality is a lot of Indonesians desperately need those jobs and that income. So I think that the route is you don't know what you don't know. You don't know the number of companies around the world that are looking in Indonesia and it falls into the too hard basket and they just never come.
That insight. Now I will open the question and answer sessions to the public. Any question and answers that you want to pose to the panelists? Okay, let's start from that side of the room. Can we have the mic runner over there? There's a lady over there. Then we will move to the middle and the right section.
Yes. Hi, I'm Jennifer. I'm the second lawyer student in UPH right now. My question is very general and somewhat simple, but I would like to ask, how would you go about in expanding on trade with regards to the LCR, not just in like centralized populated areas in Indonesia, but throughout all of the nation itself? Thank you.
Okay, does any panelist want to answer? It's a very general question. How do we expand trade across Indonesia in a fair...
Okay. I don't know Indonesia, so maybe first answer. I think for many commodities and others, transport cost domestically is higher than international cost here, the transport cost. So the exposure to a sort of foreign goods and others are really different across the whole Indonesia. So I think, of course, in case of mining products, so say Kalimantan is really big and others, but for other commodities and very far from the world market in a sense. So I think one very important thing is the reduced domestic transportation cost in case of Indonesia. Of course, by doing that, we have cheaper goods and services to get access to, but at the same time, more competition is coming too. So we really have to watch very carefully that get the sort of good benefits out of that, and taking care of a sort of drawbacks over there. But I think a domestic transport cost could be a sort of very important issue in the case of Indonesia.
I completely agree with that. Given the the geography of Indonesia with lots of islands, the cost of logistics is definitely one big issue. Okay, we can move to the next question from the middle section. Okay. Mic runner. We'll start from the back.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Zara. I'm the third year student of Faculty of Law, University of Pelita Harapan's professional class. So my question is for Ibu Michels and Professor Kimura. How far can a bilateral investment treaty, if there is any in one country, can protect the LCR requirements or policies? And I'm wondering if there is any real disputes, especially if there is any discriminatory provisions against foreign investors. Thank you.
No, I'm going to throw to you. Actually, like in our article, I'm responsible for the trade, while James is responsible for investment. So I will throw this. But anyway, so I will just address about from the trade law perspective. So Well, the local content requirements, they are very popular policy. Most of the countries, they are actually have this LCR policy. However, if you see at the WTO dispute settlement, the case remains very low. So even like there are a lot of trade concerns raised by WTO members against Indonesia LCR measures, telecommunications, pharmaceuticals, and so on, but it not really reached until dispute settlement panel. So sometimes, like you're wondering why, actually, perhaps at this level, they would like to settle through negotiations. For example, like Japanese government is actually raised a concern about Indonesia LCR on modern retail. And when they raised these concerns, I think a couple of months later, and Indonesia start to change their regulation. So now I think they removed this LCR on the modern retail. But there are few cases reach this WTO dispute settlement. And if you look at again the list, a number actually is related to renewable energy. So for me, when I look at, there's two sectors that they have, the concern escalated until dispute settlement. One is renewable energy, solar panel, wind turbines, and the other one is related to automobile industry. So, and then James, do you want to add something?
From the perspective of international investment law and bilateral investment treaty, actually it's quite similar to trade in the sense that it's a discrimination. Local content requirements will mean that it's a discrimination against foreign products or foreign services. So in the case of investment law, the discipline of national treatment becomes very relevant. And there are very few cases of local content requirements per se. But one that really comes to mind is in Canada, there was a requirement by the Canadian government that in order to qualify for certain subsidies, this particular business industry must engage research and research development done by a local Canadian company or Canadian institution. So that was deemed to be a discrimination and was declared as a breach of the national treatment standard under bilateral investment treaty. Any other questions? Okay, next. Okay, there's one more, and then we'll move to the right side.
Hello, my name is Dewi Tampu Bolon. I'm a student law and also entrepreneur. So my question is, with the presence of local content, does it not disturb the potential for significant foreign investment in Indonesia? With all my respect, this is not about a lack of love for local content, but what concrete steps can be taken to implement a solution? Thank you so much.
Scott, will you be interested in answering this? I think this is very relevant to. Can you please repeat the question once more?
I'm not sure I fully understood it. Sorry, do you mind to repeat it? I think, just to make sure I understood.
With the presence of local content, does it not disturb the potential for significant foreign investment in Indonesia? This is not about a lack of love for local content, but what is the concrete steps that can be taken and implemented for solution?
Well,
thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the question. I think that the potential for disturbance is abundantly clear. It absolutely deters foreign investment. What to do about it, I think the easiest answer is don't do it. You know, when you think about some of these things, there are several examples that illustrate what might seem like a flippant response of don't do it, but there's a lot of unintended consequences. For example, a different way to attack this problem the government tried last year was to ban imports of several goods, one of which were the big, massive tires that mining companies across Indonesia use. The problem is you can't buy them. They don't sell them at Grand Lucky. So when you stop selling or allowing those tires to be sold by foreign providers, and there's no factories here, all of the companies that need those really big tires can't keep digging the things that generate jobs and income. Similarly, I think it was like mid-2000s, there was a big beef dispute with Australia. And the government's response was to ban beef imports, which you would think would help the beef industry in Indonesia. But the actual outcome was that beef prices skyrocketed. And because beef prices became so high, the Indonesian ranchers started slaughtering the breeder cattle. What does that mean? You have one really good bull and you have the other really good cows that you want to make more baby cows so you can expand and have more cows, because who doesn't like hamburgers? But because they stopped imports, the outcome was not to actually expand the beef industry, but in fact, beef production plummeted because all of the boy and girl cows that were supposed to make baby cows were becoming hamburgers. So the challenge with these types of restrictions is not only does it stop foreign direct investment, it can sometimes even result in hurting the Indonesian economy. In the case of not allowing big tires to come in, it hurts the potential for those companies to generate profits, which becomes taxes, to employ people. In the case of restricting the beef imports, rather than expanding and growing the Indonesian beef sector, the result was actually a huge step backwards for beef production in Indonesia. So when I say just don't do it, I'm not being sarcastic. I'm simply saying that I think the market itself can support, the demand here is clear, but in many cases the restrictions prevent the production of goods that are not available domestically and don't allow those markets to expand.
Okay, we can move now to the next question from the right side. We have two questions.
My name is Nathaniel Hardnata. I am from International Law Program, batch of 21. This is a question for Mr. Scott Hanna. From the perspective of a businessman, is it worth it for businesses to comply with LCRs to be able to operate in countries, even though that there may be a reduction in the quality of the product, or even be operating at a loss? Thank you.
Well, I'm here. Obviously, there are certain industries and businesses that will battle through various regulations because the market is great. The Indonesian economy has remarkable potential. If you can find me another economy with 300 million people growing at 5% a year to invest in, sign me up. So it's very attractive. Businesses want to participate. But to your follow-on question, are they willing to operate at a loss? For those of you who haven't gone into business yet, I can tell you that's a bad business strategy. So there will be a limit to how much they're willing to tolerate. Of course, in early stages, businesses often lose money, but that threshold comes back to my original point. If it's too onerous, it's too complicated, the business will just say, look, it's not worth it. The practical reality is it remains an appealing market because of the potential, because of the size. But again, I think that there's, what did Nixon say, the silent majority. I think there are a huge number of foreign companies who are interested in Indonesia who don't invest here because of these rules.
Next question we have from,
Hello, my name is Davi. I'm also from the International Law Program, batch 2021. My question addressing to the whole panel is, compared to other countries, specifically in the ASEAN circle, how restrictive are Indonesia's local content requirements? And in your experience throughout the whole panel, which specific laws and regulations scare away most foreign investors from investing here? Thank you.
Yeah, so I have to check the statistics. If you go to the website of Global Trade Alert, you can see a sort of number of policies implemented, introduced by each country, a Global Trade Alert. So I have to check that. But I think Indonesia is one of the champions to introduce local content requirements in this region, I think. Many countries did that in the past, but pretty much removed. That's my understanding, but I have to check.
I'm not an academic. I couldn't give you statistics of how Indonesia compares vis-a-vis the ASEAN, but I would point to an illustrative fact of what played out during the global financial crisis to show, or illustrate rather, the relative closedness of the Indonesian economy. If you look at the wake of the global financial crisis, the only G20 country not to contract economically was Indonesia, which you could say is a good thing, right? You know, it was a global financial crisis, Indonesia didn't contract economically. But the alternative interpretation is it's illustrative of how closed and isolated, insulated the Indonesian economy is from the global economic ecosystem. And, you know, if your development model is to be the mushroom kingdom, then that's amazing. But I think that there is tremendous loss of being isolated. As a further example of illustrating some of the challenges, different countries are different at different things for a reason. So as an example, Indonesia is very eager to push data centers being located in Indonesia. So what is the downside of having a data center in Indonesia? We all like to use the cloud. We all like to have our data available whenever we want it. But what are some good things about data centers that would be better elsewhere? First of all, they generate a lot of heat. Indonesia is a hot country. So the operating cost for data centers in hot countries is much higher. That's why you see a lot of data centers in places like Iceland, because it's not very hot. The second thing is you want your data center to be reliable so you can check Instagram at any time you want. You're in a seismically active country. The reliability of electrical infrastructure here is not amazing. And so the point being, comparative advantage still matters. And so Indonesia, I think, would be better served to target areas where they have a comparative advantage and not try to push into sectors where they're only capturing companies that need to do these certain things to meet the requirements, but it doesn't actually make sense for Indonesia.
He also asked another question, actually, Scott. Is there any particular local content requirements that you think, or from your, as the president of the AmCham, from the industry, which particular local content requirements, what kind of form local content requirements that scares foreign investors the most? Is it something that is linked to, that is being mandatory, or something that is related to subsidies?
You know, I think the answer is, you know, as we hear from, we have 300 plus member companies, it's hard to point at just one. You know, it starts with people. I think there was I think Michelle referenced during her presentation the rules about hiring. Indonesia has a very different immigration problem than a lot of developed countries. For example, the United States, immigration is a very hot button issue because people come in and take very low value jobs. That is, they work in food, they pick fruit, things like that. You're not seeing a rush of Malaysians jumping the border to come make nasi goreng. Most foreigners who come to work in Indonesia generate jobs, transfer technology. You have some exceptions, particularly you see in Chinese industrial projects, they'll often bring in laborers. You have a few random Aussies in Bali, perhaps, you know, doing some low value work. But the restrictions from people, I think of, raise your hand if you know what the FDA is. The FDA is the American body that certifies food, drugs. Of, I believe, the top 300 drugs certified by the FDA, only 9 are available in Indonesia. Why is that relevant? Because I think if any of us had a sick family member, we'd want the best medicine to be available for our family. But what's the outcome on the restriction of these medications? Indonesians can't access it. And so they fly to Singapore, and it gets outsourced, and so on and so forth. But why do those drug companies not come in and market those drugs to the Indonesian market? It's obviously a huge market. It'd be an opportunity to make money. Those local content requirements would often require them to share the formula for the medicine with the Indonesian partner. So imagine you're Pfizer and you invested $5 billion in an amazing cancer drug. And then you have to come in and partner with X Indo company and essentially share that formula. Now, of course, there'll be non-disclosure agreements and all sorts of contractual things, and there's lots of great Bible verses across the campus, but the reality is in the world, people lie, cheat, and steal. So Pfizer is going to be nervous that if they share the formula for this amazing cancer drug with a local partner, it's possible that one of them may have missed those Bible verses and sell it, and therefore those $5 billion, that's an arbitrary figure, I'm using this hypothetically, they've lost that research intellectual property that they invested so greatly to develop. So I don't think I could point to a single one. The reality is that across the economy, you see these restrictions in almost every sector.
Michelle?
Well, I cannot really tell you which country the most, but I can tell you which country the least. It is Singapore. So, well, but this is, I talk about trade in goods. I'm not really good with the services. But in trade in goods, you will see the list that applied local content requirements is Singapore. And why? Because Singapore realized its economy on international trade. So that's what, also this is one reason why, well, WTO rules have this discipline, because it want to have this trade liberalization, right? So, and LCR one is the barrier actually for this international trade. Thank you.
I will just run we are coming to a close to this session. So I have just one last question for all panelists, and I want you to just answer this very briefly. If there is any one adjective that you can describe the future of local content requirements as a policy tool of government, what will that be? We'll start from Professor Foucault.
My point is that, local content requirements are likely to be pretty inefficient policy anyway, so more efficient and clear policies should be introduced. I think that's my point that I'd like to make here.
I think we were supposed to say one word, but I think I'll say three. Problematic but enduring. I think if you look at Indonesia, but most of the rest of the world, protectionism is sexy right now, and I don't think you're going to see them go away. I think it may have been your comments or perhaps professors, one, aside from economic growth, a troubling result of the LCR is not just the growth part, but it really does create a huge window for corruption. That is, rather than following the policy of LCRs or trade restrictions, it often becomes a situation where a certain company has a relationship to a director general or a decision maker, and what it creates is, rather than the institution following the policy, it's a game of trying to win enough favor to get an exemption from the policy. So then therefore, rather than having a policy framework that protects those domestic industries, it creates a system that really sets the stage for how do we win the favor of that decision maker for the exemption. And I think in many cases, there's a huge potential for that to be won through corruption, and that's unfortunate. And so therefore, I think they're going to be around for a while, but it's not good news for the economy in my view.
Just one word, still popular, but that's two. But it's just gonna be, well, for me, they will remain popular. It's the most appealing, actually, industrial policy.
Well, that brings us to the close of this UPH area special event. Let us thank our esteemed panelists for their very enlightening discussions and lively discussions.
Ladies and gentlemen, what an exceptional session marked by insightful presentations. I now request all our presenters to please remain on stage for an appreciation and documentation session. To guide us in extending our sincere appreciation, Ms. Michelle will have the honor of presenting tokens of appreciation to our speakers and chairs. Thank you to Professor Fukumari, Mr. Scott.
Can I make one quick plug? If you want to do some additional reading, there's some copies of our investment report which kind of elaborate on some of the points I made. I think they're out at the front of reception. Feel free to grab one. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Mr. Scott, Ms. Michelle, as well as Pat James for a wonderful session. As we draw the plenary session to an end, participants are invited to a 30-minute coffee break. Following this intermission, we will reconvene for the second parallel panel session of the ICRTA. The discussion for this session will be allocated to 4 different rooms, each dedicated to exploring distinct topics outlined in the accompanying presentation slides. To ensure a seamless transition and optimize your engagement, licensed officers have been assigned. These officers stand ready to guide and assist participants as they navigate from their coffee break to their preferred rooms. For our presenters, following this session, a conference dinner awaits. Kindly gather at the lobby at 5:30, where shuttle services to the venue will be provided. To facilitate a smooth departure, a licensed officer will be available to guide you. Your cooperation is greatly appreciated, and we look forward to a delightful evening of networking. Thank you.